Hello everyone and welcome to today's session of the RIOTS Science Club. I'm here today with Lorenza and Bing, both from the Rotterdam side, and we're very happy to see that so many of you have joined us today for our session in which we have Dr. Sjoerd Bruijn with us, who will tell us about his personal journey into open science. I'm particularly grateful that this is the topic that we have today, as today will also be the last time in at least the foreseeable future that you will see me here as a core team member of the Rotterdam side. My PhD trajectory is ending and I will now continue finishing my master's in medicine by doing my clinical internships. So why am I especially grateful for the topic of today? Well, that is because the past 2 years have also marked my own personal journey into open science, or at least the beginning of it. And I'm eternally grateful for everyone that has played a role in this. I'm always tempted to name specific people, but if I start doing so, I will also definitely forget to name people that have absolutely deserved a very big thank you. So I'll just stick to a huge thanks to the people within the RIOTS that have provided me, or actually have provided us, with all the opportunities and support to take the Rotterdam site wherever we wanted to take it. Also the people within my own team that have enabled me to devote time to spend on the RIOTS, and of course everyone that has been enthusiastic about any of our endeavors along the way. And that certainly includes everyone that is here today. So before I get all sentimental and continue to rattle on endlessly, let me just say that the RIOTS has been one of the most joyful experiences of my PhD trajectory, that I look back with nothing but a very big smile and a lot of pride in what we've accomplished. And honestly, I can't wait to see what the RIOTS will shape towards in the upcoming future, in whatever directions that may be. But before we get to the far future, next week the RIOTS has a great upcoming event. Here you can see that on the 5th of April, a talk will be hosted at KCL on the topic of publishing open data in humanities, the experience of the Journal of Open Humanities Data. So be sure to mark your calendar for that at 12 British Standard Time. If you want to keep posted on our upcoming seminars, you can subscribe to our mailing list, for which you can find the details on our website. We'll put the links to the website in the Q&A box where you can see them. And if you want to join our team at one of our sites, or if you want to set up your own site, also always feel free to contact us. A short bit of housekeeping. All of our events are hosted on Teams Live Events. That's a one-way streaming service, but of course we always love input from our audience. So if you have any questions either during or after the talk, you can drop those in the Q&A box, where you can also upvote the questions that you would like us to ask to Sjoerd. And if you joined slightly late, you can start from the beginning, and during the talk you can also pause and rewind. So then it's time to move on to the session that we have today. I'm very happy to introduce our speaker, Dr. Sjoerd Bruijn. Sjoerd is an assistant professor at the VU in Amsterdam. His research focuses on the way humans walk, the building of the human body, and the control from the central nervous system. In doing his work, he's passionate about doing that research in the best way possible. And he figured, probably like many of us, that to accommodate this, open science practices could improve his work. Today, he will therefore share his personal journey into open science, why he uses certain practices, how it has helped him, and also where it took him to funny places, which have at least left him with compelling stories to share. Needless to reiterate that I'm very enthusiastic to hear all about it. So without further ado, Sjoerd, if you can share your screen, then the floor is yours.
I'm working on it.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Okay, good. So welcome everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me for giving this talk. I'm actually very excited to give this talk, but I also find it a bit hard because usually as scientists we're very much accustomed to talking about the research we do and not the ways in which we do it. Yet I think it is important to sometimes talk about that. And so when I was asked to do this talk, I thought, okay, I should give this a go. I've given similar talks more often, but it's always frightening to me in a way because, well, it's not something we usually talk about. So I'll talk about my experiences in open science, and I'd like to start with a huge shout out, thank you to several people. The thing is, I'm not doing this alone. I'm doing this with a host of people. A host of people have inspired me, yeah, so I'm very grateful to some of these people that are mentioned here. There's many others that are not mentioned here, but still had a big influence on me. And as you see, that's all from Twitter, because that's where I got most of my knowledge. I mean, you can call it good, you can call it bad. This is the way it is. And there's some awesome PhD students in here and some amazing professors that have really shaped my thinking in this. So huge shout out to them. And I always do this up front, because if I leave this to the end, I'm sure I will forget. And you see some of their work represented throughout this presentation. So I have basically two goals with this presentation. And so it's my experiences, so I'm not going to learn you anything. Actually, I'm just going to tell my experiences. So for me, this is, in a way, a nice talk, right? But I still do have some goals. I want to tell you my experience in pre-registration, sharing data and sharing code, and why I'm actually quite happy about it, and why maybe you should be too. And also, I want to tell you a bit how cool it is to study human walking. So to start off with the last one, I study human walking, and you may have seen this game, QWOP, QWOP, where you have 4 controls, Q, W, O, and P, and you have to make this runner run. And if you try it, and now I hope that not everybody stopped this stream and goes to find this online, and if you look it up, you can find it. If you try it, you can find that it's incredibly difficult to even get this guy to run, and that most tries will result in failure. You have only 4 controls here. We have 100, somewhere in the vicinity of like 100 or more muscles in our legs that we need to control to walk stable. And even with 4 controls, it's very hard to do this. And the result, if you're not doing this correctly, is a fall. So I'm really curious, like, how do we do it? And my hope is that if we understand this, we can actually use that and make people that fall often, for instance, those with a stroke or a spinal cord injury or elderly, can make that they fall less often. The cool thing is I do experiments for this in which we have people walk on a treadmill and then we yank on them until they fall or not. So this was one of my experiments where this was actually the professor at the time I was doing my PhD, and I got to put him in our setup. And he tried our perturbation setup. And this was even one of the milder perturbations, so I got to basically pull my professor off the treadmill. I think that's a cool thing to do. And so we measure how people place their foot in response to these perturbations, etc. We do these measurements with 3D kinematics, so you get these really cool pictures in 3D, and we measure all these metrics that say something about it. So that is about kind of my content of my research. I'll come back to that, like some more content-wise interesting stuff. But so how did I get involved in open science? Well, kind of there's this how it started, how it's going meme. And how it started is that a colleague of mine, Drinka Pototanic, at some point said, well, does anybody have some experience with the registered reports in field of posture and gait research, which is the field I'm working in? And I was like, well, I don't even know if we need this, because why would you need it? I mean, we can just be honest, right? And so had a long Twitter discussion. And well, how it's going is that now I get invites. This one was from the VU library to give talks on open science, because yes, I've done some pre-registration of my work. Yes, I'm sharing my data and code most of the time now. So I've come a long way, I would say. I mean, it was not that I've ever was against it. I more thought, well, do we really need it? We can all be honest, right? And I still think that way, but I also think that it's not so much work actually to make it more open and honest and register, etc. So before I continue, I want to have a disclaimer. I am by no means an expert, right? I'm just trying. I'm just on Twitter a whole lot. You may have seen that if you follow me on Twitter. And I see a lot happening there, and I think, well, that's interesting, and maybe I should try it. And I'm trying to make my science better. I just want to do the best science I can do. I want to have, when I report my data, that it is the best quality data that there can be, and that everyone would draw the same conclusion from it, and that if you would do the same experiment, you would find similar findings. And that's, I think that's hard enough as it is. So we need to constantly improve in doing that. And I didn't start this alone, to be honest. It was PhD students that pushed me at some point and asked me like, Sjoerd, I want to pre-register my work. And I was like, well, should we do it? Well, and yes, I went along with them, and it was amazing. Yeah, I'll show you examples of this. So, to be honest, the PhD students here played a large role, and they helped me a lot in going in this direction. And not only the PhD students, I also worked with the right professors. I saw some people that, you know, they have debates with their professors because they don't want to share the data or the code or whatever. And I work with amazing people that are very open to all of these things and very encouraging. So that's, I gotta be, yeah, I'm very happy with that. And also, this is an apology. So normally my slides don't contain text and mostly figures. And I couldn't figure out, pun intended here, how to do that for this presentation. I've tried to add some more figures in and remove some text, but there's still going to be a whole lot of text because that basically just explains best what I want to tell. So I started my journey into open science at the OSF homepage. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I quickly learned, well, you know, there's also Zenodo where you can put your data. And there's bioarchives where you can put your preprints. And there's Figshare where you can put your figures or your data. And there's GitHub where you can put your code. And there's DataDrive where you can also put your code. And Danskanawe is also a place where you can put your code. And there's a registry of research data repositories. And there's as predicted. And I was like, holy crap. Yeah. There's too much. I don't know what to choose. Where should I put my data? Do I put it at Dans? Do I put it Figshare? Do I put it Zenodo? Honestly, I still don't know. Yeah. So I'm still no expert. And what if I told you perfect is the enemy of good? I think just going for something is more important than finding the exact right tool. If I would go for the exact right tool, I would probably still be doing nothing. I would still be figuring out, like, do I put my data here or there? What's the advantage? And I, in the beginning, when starting to do open science, I was getting caught up in this a bit until I thought, well, this is not my main job, right? No, it's not my main job to find out what is the best exact way to share your data or whatever. I want to share it. I want to do my best. But what is the best? I don't have time for that. I want to do research and content. You've seen how cool my research is, right? I get to yank professors off the treadmill. I want to do that. I want to report on the data of that. And I want to do that in the best possible way. I don't want to study what is the best possible way to do it. I just want to use a good enough way to report all that and to put all that out in the world. So I decided, well, perfect is the enemy of good. I'm going to go for good enough. And so if you have questions like what is the best way to do that or this, or probably I'm not having the right answer for you. I do have answers on, like, would you do that or would you do that? Yes, and I have experiences with those, but probably people can tell you better tools than the tools that I'm using. So I'd be happy to hear. So I'll tell a bit about my experiences with authoring, reviewers, and editors. And actually, like I said, I'm looking for best ways to do my science. And to be honest, part of pre-registration, for instance, wasn't really a big deal for me because this is what my computer looks like. So I have a folder which is called To Do, and it contains these ideas. basically ideas of projects that I want to do. And so you see many folders in there, and for each of these folders, there's an entire document, which is basically my paper already written out. Title page, abstract, introduction, methods. I even often had or have a results section where I write like, okay, these are the subheadings of the results. These are the most likely results. And I will have a discussion section like, well, these topics will be in the discussion. And so this is, in terms of pre-registration, this is actually more extensive than pre-registration. And the funny thing is, as I wrote, what you see is a screenshot for a paper for which no data was collected at all yet. And this is nine years later, but I think this is from a slide from a presentation 2 years ago. So I think it's 11 years later. I still have not collected the data for this paper, but if I wanted to do it, it's all there. So for me, going from here to pre-registering research was really a small step, because most of the time I already did like have a very clear outline of what my paper would look like. So pre-registration, for those that don't know, is simply specifying upfront what you will do and how, and storing that document in a locked timestamp format. And you can always do this. It doesn't really require that you submit to a specific journal. And it is nice because it allows to differentiate between confirmatory research, which is hypothesis testing, and results are held to high standards. It minimizes false positives, p-values retain diagnostic values, and you can contrast that to exploratory research, which is hypothesis generating. If you find something, it may be good to replicate it because you will not always find it. P-values lose diagnostic value, etc. Well, all of this is from the OSF page, but this idea that pre-registration is actually a good idea, to me, it didn't occur so much because, well, I was doing my own pre-registration in a way, right? So I have these documents already. But then I thought, well, it may be good. If I have it already, why don't I do it, right? If you are so close to pre-registering and you have it pre-registered for yourself, why not actually pre-register it? So using the template from As Predicted, it actually was a small step for me, because this is not my own pre-registration. This is an example that they have online there, and this is what a pre-registration from a study could look like, right, in their according to their example. And now you can clearly see already that this is actually a much smaller form than what I had as my personal pre-registration, which is basically a full-blown paper already. So yeah, I thought, okay, let's do this. And actually, Nick Kluft, PhD student, was the first one who said to me, let's do it. And I said, okay, let's go for it. And we did it. And we had a really nice experience. There were things that were, which in my own research, I realized I wouldn't specify so much. One of them was sample sizes. Now you have to know that in biomechanics research, effects are usually large. I mean, you have to think about what does somebody's walking change like when he speeds up or slows down. And as you can imagine, that is rather similar for everybody. So then so we do this within subject designs, and everybody will more or less do the same. So then the variability in the effect is rather small, so we can detect rather small effects. So we usually have quite big effect sizes. So we usually don't need so many subjects. And we usually say, okay, we do 10 or 15 and that's it. And now with pre-registration, we really needed to specify this. And so we did this with Nick Kluft's experiment here. And we also went for a Bayesian sampling approach. And so we did monitor the Bayes factor during data collection. So for each subject, after each subject, or we start first with 20 healthy elder adults, And after that, we increased until the base factor exceeds the selected threshold, or a maximum of 50 participants has been reached. Now, these are experiments which take quite some time. Not only the experiment itself takes time, we do full body 3D motion capture, so we put a lot of markers on the subject. So that takes time. Per subject, we spend about 2 to 3 hours. But also the data processing often takes like 1 to 2 hours per subject. And then you only at a point where you can go into the statistics. So it really takes time. In this particular study, we ended up with 24 subjects, which was okay, somewhere in the range of expected. However, we also did another pre-registration of a project of Myra van Leeuwen. And we had an initial sample size of 10 healthy participants, and we did this Bayesian sampling approach as well. And then we said, okay, recruitment of participants will continue until a threshold of meaningful evidence is reached, or a maximum of 30 participants. And this study by Myra van Leeuwen was actually even more extensive, because here we had 39 markers, 3D markers, and 16 EMG markers, and each of these markers are have cables. So there's a lot of cables attached to somebody. Somebody basically looks like a Christmas tree. So it's always these experiments to set up only. So from the subject enters the lab until they really can start walking on a treadmill takes about 1.5 hours. So it's really quite extensive. And we set initial sample size of 10 healthy participants because, as I said, in biomechanics research, usually, 10, and then we're there, right? Well, we were kind of wrong here, because in the end we measured 35 participants, which you may say, well, that's above the maximum of 30, so you shouldn't do that, and you're right. But actually, if you read here, that finally the data of 30 participants were included in the analysis, because we had 4 subjects that had to be discarded because of technical malfunctioning of the equipment, and data of 1 participant were excluded for another reason. But so we ended up with 30 subjects, which to measure, Myra did really a great job here. I mean, this is really in biomechanics studies with full body kinematics and EMG, you will not find many studies, experimental studies that do this. This is like, most people would consider this overkill. However, it allowed us to make much stronger statements about everything, right? Well, of course, that's obvious, but it also allowed us to show some null effects combined with the Bayesian statistics. So we could say with certainty, okay, this is not happening. This effect is clearly not there. And in our field, you don't see that so often. So we were quite happy actually that we did this. On one way, every time Myra, I can still remember, every time she measured a subject and she ran the data analysis, and she was like, oh, maybe the base factor now jumps to where we want it to be. And it was like, oh, we need one more. Oh, we need one more. so it can be a bit disappointing, but in the end we have a super cool data set, which I think is really is really great. So I want to switch gears here and do a little bit of content-wise, and not so much about like my experience with the open science, but tell you a bit about the research we do, because also that relates to the next bit about my experience with pre-registration actually. So if you step down a curve, you can do it in 2 ways, and you see those 2 figures here. The top figure is stepping down on his toes, and the bottom figure is stepping down on his heel. And the interesting thing is that if you step down on your toes, it is actually safer because you have more ways to dissipate the energy that you get from stepping down a curb, right? If you step down a curb, you have some extra potential energy, and if you step on your toes, you can use your ankle joint and your toes basically to dissipate that energy. If you step on your heel, you cannot dissipate your energy in that way. So it's less safe to step down on your heel. However, if you step on your toes, you're dissipating all that energy, which is energetically more costly. So if you step on your heels, energetically it's less costly, but it's also less safe. So you have a kind of an energy stability trade-off, right? Where you say, okay, I don't care about energy, I want to be stable, you're going to step on your toes. And if you say, I don't care about stability, I want to be energy efficient, you step on your heels. And the interesting thing is that even for healthy humans and like me, we can walk normally well. There's a switch in this behavior. So if you walk on a very small height, you probably step down on your heels because you don't care so much about stability, and being energy efficient is much more important. Now, if you increase the height, at some point you start stepping down on your toes. And the idea, of course, you can already feel that for yourself. It's like, well, at some point it just becomes rather dangerous to just bang your heel on the ground, right? So you want to do it on your toes, and then it's gonna cost you some energy. So there is a switch between those behaviors. And now we are interested in like, how do elderly do that? And is that influenced also by fear? And so what you could do is just take a whole bunch of elderly and measure them and see, well, are those that are more fearful, is that switch happening later at higher heights, right? Or for the more fearful one, you would expect it to happen at lower heights, actually. And the other thing you could do is to say, well, we build a setup where we have step downs of different heights, and also the entire setup can be changed in height. And that's actually what we did. So this is also, again, by Nick Kluft. And we built a setup where we can elevate the entire setup so that the step down takes place either at ground level or 1 meter above the floor. And the idea is if you're 1 meter above the floor, you definitely don't want to fall because you're going to fall off the setup. So you're going to pay some more attention to your safety and some less to your energy. Now we have this walking speed indicator with a LED strip that is running alongside the subject, because there's also effects of walking speed on whether you go do a toe landing or a heel landing. Of course, we had a safety harness because, well, we don't want people to fall off there, right? Yeah, we could raise this platform up and down. Now we did a study here on this, and this was pre-registered as well, and we had some hypotheses about the effects of anxiety and arousal, physiological arousal. So our ideas was, well, your physiological arousal will go up if you do this on a height, and we measure that with skin conductance. So we put some electrodes on the skin, and if you are more aroused, what happens is you start to sweat, and your skin conductance becomes better, right? So your skin becomes more conductive. And so we said, okay, so we use that as a measure of arousal, and then we classify in highly aroused and less aroused, and we see if there's effects of that. And we pre-registered that. And this is one of the questions I always get with pre-registered research, which I had myself as well, like, well, but you're setting stuff in stone, and what if you find out that actually what you did doesn't really work? And well, it doesn't really matter, right? We have, in our manuscript, we simply have deviations from the pre-registration document. And you'll find that in most studies that are pre-registered. And we have 3 aspects that deviate from the registered document that should be noted. And I'm not going to focus on the first 2 because I didn't explain that. But we said, okay, for the between participant comparison, so to compare between fearful and non-fearful subjects, we plan to categorize fear on the basis of physiological arousal data. However, the grouping cutoffs appeared arbitrary. So we plan to do, say, okay, we have a cutoff here and everyone is above that, that's fearful, and below that is non-fearful. But everything we tried there was actually didn't make sense. So what we said, okay, we do a linear regression instead, because that doesn't need cutoffs. And so this is the way you can go around with your deviations from pre-registration. So there's another interesting part about walking. I talked a bit about stability and energy already. And in the next study that I want to tell a bit about, I want to show a part of a movie where we study how much energy does it cost to remain stable. And one of the PhD students, Mohammed Reza Mahaki, he made a really nice movie about that. So I'll show part of that movie before diving into the next studies, the next experiences with also, again, pre-registration, but also sharing the data and code that we use.
How we walk is an inherent part of how we present ourselves. Gender, job, style, age, different aspects of who we are reflected in our walking pattern. For example, models adjust their walking pattern to look cool, sexy, and fashionable. Yet, no matter what we want our walking to express, for all of us, it remains crucial to consider our energetic cost and stability. Yes, you heard that right. I said crucial. Even though you might not actively consider it, energy and stability demands determine how you walk. By changing the way we walk, we study the energy cost of walking stability. Let's give an example. Older adults walk with a higher energy cost compared to young adults. The question is whether this higher energy cost in older adults is related to their stability during walking. To answer this question, we need to know what determines the cost of walking in young and older adults. Young adults spend almost 60% of their total energy cost to generate propulsive force and to propagate their leg. Do they need to spend part of their energy cost to control their stability during walking as well? People study this. There are actually several papers about energy cost of walking stability. In these studies, they use gas analyzer to measure energy cost of walking. They also use external lateral stabilization, which is a spring-like construction. During walking with external...
So this external lateral stabilization setup that you saw in the end is a setup which we use where we stabilize people. And the idea is if you stabilize people, then you don't need to stabilize yourself anymore. And then all the things that you normally do to stabilize yourself, they go away. And so you expect less control and you expect less energy consumption because all the energy that you would spend on keeping yourself stable is actually done by the device. So we've used this device quite a bit in several studies. In one of the studies, we looked at the control of of walking stability and of running stability, and we compared these. And this was a pre-registered study as well. And we got some pretty nasty reviewer comments, to be honest. So this reviewer 2, it's always reviewer 3 actually, right? But this was reviewer 2. And they said there is an overemphasis on hypothesis testing throughout the manuscript that is unwarranted and diminishes the credibility of the manuscript. This work is primarily exploratory in nature. Blah, 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 blah. This unwarranted overemphasis on hypothesis testing continues throughout the results and discussion section in particular, as the dependent measures addressed here have not yet been assessed in running. An exploratory study to determine how running is similar or different from walking is perfectly legitimate, but the manuscript must be written to present the work as such. Now, at this point, of course, we were very happy that we had pre-registered our work. Because, well, I mean, if we would have like document that I would usually do that's sitting on my hard disk, I would probably have to. There was no way that I could have made this point to the reviewer that actually this was hypothesis driven, right? And so now actually we had the pre-registration. So our answer was, we appreciate the reviewer's concern about the credibility of her submitted manuscript. One suggested method for deterring harking, hypothesizing after results are known, is pre-registration of the research proposal. We did not officially pre-register a proposal. That's true, actually. This was not an official pre-registration as with the pre-registration template, but we had like the document, as I showed before. We put that on a proposal page on OSF, and that has a timestamp. From this, it can be appreciated that our hypotheses were formulated before the data, which all have a date after the set date stamp. So we shared also the data, so the reviewer could actually see that the data had dates which were after the document were collected. Thus, we do not agree with the reviewer that we are harking. To make this clear to the reader also, we have put a short text in the introduction, which reads, our initial research proposal for this project can be found at, and the link to the OSF. Now, you would think that the reviewer here would say, okay, thank you, and you're right. But actually, we then got into a debate about what is a hypothesis and what is a prediction. And then the reviewer made the point that we were not making hypotheses, but we're making predictions. I think that's a whole different philosophical discussion, which is interesting, but basically had nothing to do with his original idea that we had these hypotheses after we saw the data, which was clearly not so. So we were really happy that we put our proposal online before we did any of the data collection, and we could simply show, well, look, this was indeed our plan. This was what we expected to find, and we found it. And to me, this was one of the moments where I was really happy with the pre-registration, and even though I said this was not an official pre-registration, but I mean I think it was a pre-registration in the essence of doing, and not in in a formal sense. And to me, that really doesn't matter so much. So we shared our data and code as well, which also allowed us to do this, right? Because otherwise the reviewer probably could have said, well, you know, you have this document, but you could have put this document online after you collected all your data. And I think sharing the data and code is nice, but it's also scary as hell. I probably have other people had looked at your code if you do any coding in R, Python, whatever, and it always feels a bit scary, right? You think, oh, maybe they discover a mistake, or they think my code looks like shit, and yeah, and I have that feeling as well, but I don't care so much anymore. So we have an experience here where we usually put the data on and code, and we put them on temporary during the review process. We put them on a Surf drive, which is the university system for file sharing, and then we have a temporary link for the reviewers, because if we put them already on a more permanent repository, especially the code, well, things may change, right? Because the reviewers may have comments. And so we had shared our data and code for another paper, also by Mohammed, and we worked on the code together and the data, but we messed up somewhere. And so we got the reviewer, who was really cool about it, because he said the others made all the data and analysis script available, which is great. Looking over what's in the cloud drive, however, I noticed some weird issues. One issue is some of the variables have very large jumps. And so he mentions some of these things. And so this is what can happen in biomechanics data, that if you don't do appropriate filtering and cleaning of the data, you may have these issues. So we had made these graphs to check for ourselves whether we have these issues, and we had stored them in one of the folders, and the reviewers have gone over them. And actually, yes, we forgot to actually go over these graphs and check whether our data was cleaned well enough. So did we feel bad? Pretty, yeah, sure. But we also said, well, this is one of the reasons why we share our data and code, to make sure that we don't end up publishing rubbish, right? And and we were really happy that the reviewer spotted this mistake. So I think this was, to me, this was really, I felt really bad at this point. I was really like, oh shit, how could we have published this? Well, could we have forgot this step? But then I realized everybody forgets these kind of things, and for one reason or another, right? Or makes some of these mistakes. And I think that there's nothing better than that this get caught by a reviewer. It would be way worse if this would be caught, not at all caught. In the end, by the way, this didn't affect the result. So the main result stays the same because this was random noise and the effects were large. So it averaged out and didn't really matter. But still, I think catching a mistake yourself is the best thing, right? And then I think the second best thing is if the reviewer helps you catch it. I think the worst thing is that it's published and lots of people cite it, and in the end, I don't know, somebody asks for your data set and you're sharing your data set, and it all turned out to be rubbish. So did I feel bad? Yeah, pretty. Am I happy that the reviewer caught it? Yeah, pretty much. Also, this reviewer signed his review and I knew who he was, so I actually sent a thank you note afterwards, because yeah, this is we were quite happy at this point. And also, so my last experience, and I'm realizing I'm running a bit short actually, so I'm not one of those persons that always runs over time, but there's plenty of time for questions then, right? So editors actually have been very appreciative of the stuff that we've been doing with sharing data and code and pre-registering. So this was one email that we got in response to a paper by Mara van Leeuwen, where the editor said, I'm pleased to inform you that your manuscript has been judged scientifically suitable and we accept it. Well, that's blah, blah, blah. Personally, I'm happy to congratulate you on a very methodological and thorough study and commend your group for pre-registration. Very nice work. And we get more of these messages. So people in the field where I'm in actually seem to be very open to these changes and pre-registering, sharing data, etc. And we also see that our data sets are being picked up by others, even within our own group. So we had published one of the data sets with one of the PhD students, and then we needed some data for another PhD student, and he could just use the data set of the previous PhD student, which, because we put it online, it had to be well documented. The code had to be well documented. So the second PhD student could just go online, grab all the data and code, and start working from there. And within a day, he was set. And I'm pretty sure that if we wouldn't have put the data and code online and have it documented for that, the code would be such a mess that it would take the other PhD student about a week to figure it out. And then there would be all kinds of issues. And now, because we do it even within our group, it's really easy to work with each other's data sets. So I'm coming to my takeaways. Should you pre-register share data and code? And I don't think I have to say this. Obviously, yes. And it costs very little time. At least to me, it costs very little time if you're organized. It costs very little time, and you should be organized because, I think that is step one of research, is being organized, and it can greatly benefit you and others. If you want to know more about stuff, a good place to start is the Open Science Foundation, and they didn't put Twitter on here, but I think Twitter is also a great place to start. I learned so much on there from different people. And actually, my PhD students, they entered, two of my PhD students entered a competition for Open Science Award, which we have here at our department, at the Faculty of Behavioral and Movement Sciences. And they had to make a movie for that. And I want to share one of those movies because I thought it was pretty well explaining why we should do open science. So, as I said, my PhD students are actually better explaining this than me, and I'm pretty proud of that. So here's my last slide, and after that I'll have room for questions with the movie made by Mara van Leeuwen.
For my first step as a PhD student, I was guided by my grade supervisors to follow the path of open science. For my first experiment, we pre-registered our hypothesis and posted the protocol and analysis plan on OSF. This was very convenient, not only to ensure reviewers and fellow researchers that our research was really hypothesis-driven, but also for ourselves, to remember all of our hypotheses. And we had quite a lot of them. Once I collected my data, I benefited from my pre-registration again. As for my analysis, I just had to follow the recipe on OSF. For some parts of the analysis, we deviated from our earlier registration. Yet, we were transparent about this and explained our reasoning in the paper. Through our preprint and by making our code and analysis freely available online, we were able to receive early feedback from fellow researchers on Twitter, as well as detailed comments from the reviewers. As such, we could improve the quality of the paper and help other researchers understand exactly what we did. Why do we think this is important? Let's say our results are represented by this basketball trick. Without any openness on how we got to this result, it is just that. Just a trick someone pulled off. But what if I also showed you the ways in which I struggled? Wouldn't that help others to not repeat my mistakes? In fact, others helped me learn by giving me feedback throughout the process, pointing out the most important components of this trick. Being open about the process helps to understand the result better. This makes it no longer a trick of one, but a collaborative finding that is reproducible. That is why I think open science is a good way to make science less of a trick revealing statistical results, but rather a process in which we all work together and learn.
And I'll switch to my takeaways, and thank you for your attention. This was all I had to tell you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, first of all, thanks a lot, Sjoerd. This was a wonderful presentation, a wonderful, well, examples from a wildly different field than we're in. So that's also quite refreshing. But, well, let me start by saying that that video as a takeaway was just a brilliant, well, brilliantly made video. I think the basketball trick and making research less of a trick and more of a, well, collaborative thing in which you can see also where there were learning opportunities and not repeat each other's mistakes. That's just brilliant. I also wanted to say that I absolutely loved how you shared that, well, mistakes can happen and that sharing your code and your data in an open manner can actually help others spot the mistakes that you make, because it's not, well, we are all humans, so we all make mistakes. So it's not to blame the person that's making the mistake, although it feels super scary to share everything because you make yourself vulnerable, but it's about making our scientific literature self-correcting in that way. But yeah, I'm noticing that I'm rattling, so I'll just continue on to, well, one of the first questions that popped up in my mind. And I was wondering, so, well, we're in wildly different fields, so, it's, you often talked about pre-registration when I think you pre-register most of your studies before you are collecting data. Have you ever also reused data and pre-registered a study with secondary data analysis? Or, well, I was wondering if you've done it, and if so, what did you experience in the differences between not having collected the data and having collected the data?
We have not done that. Actually, the study I told you about where the second PhD student was using data from a first PhD student, we could have done that there because for the second, we actually knew what we were going to do. However, we were a bit too rushed to think about that. So that happens, right? So like I said, I'm just doing my best and fail at every point. So I haven't done that, no. I think, yeah, especially if you're working with larger data sets, this will happen, right? Often I think for these larger data sets, you actually need to hand in an analysis plan even to get access to the data. And I think that's a very good idea. I don't have any experience with that. I think that in the future, if I will use like a biomechanics data set that has already been published, or that we used it before and then now used for a different purpose, I would probably also pre-register. It depends if we have clear hypothesis. So I must also be honest that not all of our work is hypothesis driven. We also sometimes have like, okay, let's see, you know, we have a fake hunch that may be an interesting direction to go in. Let's see what happens. Yeah.
And that's perfectly fine. I mean,
sure.
there
Yeah,
are
if you're open about this, then yeah.
Exactly. I think that's the most important takeaway, that you have to be transparent about whether it was hypothesis driven or whether it was exploratory. Yeah, it's so different from my own experience because I always use secondary data, and it does often feel a bit difficult. I think it is very well possible to still pre-register your studies, but it feels difficult because you want to explain as clearly what you already know about the data.
Yeah, it's a hard part indeed. Yeah.
Yeah, especially if you've done studies on similar or parts of the data previously. Yeah. I see that we have a question coming in from Pieter van den Bergen, who says, neat presentation, Sjoerd. A question, does the PhD student receive a project template to organize data for the purpose of efficiency? Or is the data management and the associated learning process a do-it-yourself in general?
Yeah, so that's a good point. There is a lot ongoing in there. Currently, most PhD students do that themselves, and I guide them in that, like how I would do it. But they each still has their own preferences, which I think is kind of fine. And I also sometimes learn that there's more efficient ways than I do it. There is more emphasis also from funders and universities on writing data management plans, etc. So when I started my PhD and did postdocs, there was none of that, right? We had people actually in the lab that would have folders. So each subject would have a folder with the name of the subject, which is unthinkable of right now, right? But it would happen quite a bit. And so we're changing that. People are at least aware of that you cannot do that, but we don't have really good structures in place to how to structure that. And just for clarity, for those that are listening that are not in the field of biomechanics, I know Peter is. We usually have data from different systems which have different file formats, so you just group. Maybe you have a folder per subject, and within that folder you have different folders for every file format that you're collecting. So you have a bunch of files for each subject, which can be rather large sometimes. Like if you're collecting EEG, it can go up to gigabytes, kinematics, several hundred megabytes. And so, but we don't have good data management structures or courses that are very specific to what we are doing. No, and I think that people are working on that, and I think that it may be going a bit slow. Yeah.
Well, science advances one step at a time. I mean, yeah. It's really interesting. I can only imagine. I mean, I don't know how many. Well, you described your participants in your experiments as being a bit of a Christmas tree at some point during the experiment. So I can only imagine how many files must go into the data that you collect on one participant. It reminds me of in the field of neuroimaging, which we're mostly in, we have the Bibs format, which is sort of a standard format in which you can save all of your neuroimaging files. And that also, well, it's used by many in the whole community, which makes it also easier to share your data and reuse data of others, because well, I can only imagine that if you share your data in a format that's logical to you, it can take a while for someone else to understand it.
True. Yeah, there's no similar thing to the Bibs format in like biomechanics yet. So there's several formats. There's a C3D format which is often used. There's some other formats, but there's not one unifying format. I think people are working on that, although I haven't heard too much from that. Yeah, it would be great because I know the Bibs format, and I think that really is an improvement over how it happened in the past.
Yes, definitely. Well, that brings me actually to another question that I meant to ask you. So if you're preparing your, well, data, but also your code for sharing, do you spend a lot more time on preparing that as opposed to when you would just store it for your own purposes, or do you actually spend a similar amount of time on that?
For the data, not so much, because it's just folders which contain several files. But we do spend some more time on the code actually, and some organizational files like an XLS file which contains entries on which file is what condition. And usually we have those as well, but they're like more abbreviated, etc. Now we're sharing everything. We want that to be bit more clear. The code needs also more clear, and I want a clear structure with several scripts that can be run in one order, so that you get from the raw data to the outputs that are to the figures that are in the paper, and all of these need to be like documented in a way, and they need to be able to be run by anyone else, so there cannot be like references to some obscure files that are on your computer, and that takes some testing. Usually we just take the hard disk with the data and the code to someone else's computer and try it.
Yeah, that's highly similar to my own experience. I must admit, I am under the restriction that I often only share my own code and not my data, so I don't have to figure out whether it's rerunnable for someone else, because they will not be able to without the data anyway. But I share the same experience, that I spend quite a bit more time on annotating. But then on the other hand, well, I think it's similar to what you said about the following PhD student. And I have to admit, it also helps myself when I go back to old scripts and I look at what I've done 6 months before. When I get that code open, I am able to recall that a whole lot better than when that was just my personal code.
4 years ago, I got a request from somebody to get access to a data set which I collected during my PhD in 2008. Mm-hmm. And I was able to provide, so usually I cannot provide just the data, but I need also at least one script that loads in all of it, because if you don't have, I mean, it would be hard. And I needed to get that to work again, and actually spend like 1 or 2 full days on getting that to work. Yeah, so and that would have been far less if I would have done proper documentation from the start. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's sometimes also just for your own advantage that you can use these practices and save yourself, your future self time.
Yeah, definitely.
Lorenza, Bing, yes, go ahead.
Yes, I was thinking actually, well, first of all, thanks for the presentation, Sjoerd. And I really liked how you mentioned that, how open science made your science better. I also feel like sometimes there's a discussion in terms of, open science, that sometimes it's become more of an end rather than a means to do open science, to do good science. So I was wondering, like, was there any personal situation in which you were like, okay, maybe here I didn't have to do this open science practice, or maybe here it would have been better if I didn't do this, or I would have had a robust study nonetheless?
No, I don't think so. No. So there was at some point, like I said, I was at some point struggling to use what tools to use. And so I had a data set and I wanted to deposit it somewhere, and I was like, where should I do it? And then I don't think I spent too much time on it, because I can be bothered by these things, but I spent like 1 or 2 hours trying to figure out which repository would be best. And then I was like, yeah, actually I can't be bothered. As long as I can drop it somewhere and I get a DOI, I'm fine. I don't care so much. So for me, I really cannot be bothered by these things. And I see sometimes on Twitter these discussions like, you should do this or you should do that, or this in this way or that way. And I think, I mean, some of these are really important, but some of these are like, if you're going into this, you're not doing your science anymore, right? You're only studying open science and how to do it. And for me, that's not my research. My research is studying how humans walk. And
yeah. So for you, it was really just more about refining in terms of like, let's take what's good enough there for my situation. That's what kept it more to as a means rather than an end. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that there's people that do it as an end, right? But then it's like they probably develop the tools or think of the tools that I will use at some point, and that's fine. There should be those people. It's just not my thing at this moment. Maybe, I don't know, maybe in 10 years I switch to this field, and I think that that's more important and nicer to do.
Oh yeah, there's always time.
And also, the people that are developing these tools aren't developing just for themselves to use. They are developing them for researchers in
Exactly.
a wide range of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying it sounds like an interesting field, but it's not at the moment what I'm most interested in. So I think it's very important work, and but yeah.
I mean, if you can play QWOP video games and make your professor fall, then I wouldn't switch fields either. All right.
I'm not playing video games. I'm only showing video games, and then I always hope that my audience doesn't start playing video games. But it has happened to me that I do this in a lecture hall for the students, and I see like 10 laptops open and 10 pairs of fingers going try to play QWOP. So, well,
I am definitely going to give it a try later today.
It's fun.
Well, I also see that we've passed the 3 o'clock hallmark, well, at least in the Dutch time zone. So I want to thank you again for being here today, and also everyone that was attending today. We hope to see you at some of our upcoming events, and for now, have a very nice afternoon.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.